Stand up.
And now, stand-up community subscribers and listeners from around the globe, it's time to Stand Up with Pete Dominick, where we ask the important questions that impact you, your family, and your community. Such as, will higher gas prices lead to cutbacks on groceries in the discount produce aisle? And could it still be considered a kid's birthday party if my 5-year-old doesn't flee in terror from a giant animatronic rodent? And now, the podcast host who always greets animatronic mammals with a giant bear hug, Pete Dominick!
Hello and welcome to your week, my friends. It is March 7th, and I am very happy that you are listening to today's episode of Stand Up. Joining me for Maura Mondays, the great Maura Quint. Just every single week we have a thoughtful conversation. She's so smart, funny, and I really enjoyed this one, as I always do. Michael Cohen has not been on the show in a few weeks. Always love talking to Michael Cohen, all things Ukraine. He's really interesting when it comes, of course, to talking foreign policy. I got a whole bunch of sound for you, a news dump, and more. So sit back and let's get this baby started. I don't know why I told you to sit back. I mean, if you're walking your dog or in your car, whatever you're doing, thank you very much for pressing play. Lots to talk about. I hope you had a great weekend. I know the world probably seems like a scary place right now. It's certainly how it feels. I'm really glad to have you guys listening and joining me. The hangout this past Thursday was really special, as they always are. I hope to see it this Thursday. So as we are journeying through our lives together, it's great to have your support, be along the way, and learning together with you. Lots to learn about what's going on in the news. That's what we do here Monday through Thursday. Tell your friends. The best news recap of any daily news podcast is right here on Stand Up, hosted by me, Pete Dominick. So let's do it. I call it The Last 24. Go through a bunch of audio from the weekend shows. Here we go. Well, there's a lot to say. Obviously, there's so many headlines related to what's going on with Putin's war and invasion in Ukraine. But I like to start with President Zelensky himself in his own words over the weekend. I thought this was inspiring. He was asked what his current living situation is and how he's doing. I guess specifically they asked about his living conditions. And I just thought this was a simple and inspiring thing that he said.
It's hard to answer it. Life is as it is. My life today is wonderful. I believe that I am needed. I think that's the most important sense of life, that you are needed. That you're not just an emptiness that breathes and walks and eats something.
That dude is a fascinating guy, and what he is doing right now is just so remarkable. Just a few headlines. Russia-Ukraine updates. Zelensky now saying Russia's openly announcing a planned atrocity. He warned of a planned Russian strike that's going to mean countless civilian casualties. The House voted on a Ukraine aid. They'll take a measure up to ban Russia energy imports, apparently, according to Speaker Pelosi. About 600 missiles have been launched by Russia since the invasion began, according to one U.S. defense official. Netflix has cut the service to Russia, thus making it much harder to Netflix and chill, if that was even an option. 1 million Ukrainian refugees apparently have entered Poland from Ukraine, which is crazy. The headline at the New York Times, under steady barrage, Ukrainian forces repel Russians. Shelling halts Mariupol evacuation as conditions deteriorate. Band of Ukrainian troops holds Russian assault at bay for now. Some of the headlines at the Washington Post related to this. Civilian toll mounts in Ukraine. World leaders raise question of possible war crimes. Big swath of Ukraine cut off from natural gas after damage to pipeline. The U.S. discusses oil exports with Venezuela amid a proposal to ban Russian fuel. And one more at the Washington Post. U.S. and allies quietly prepare for Ukrainian government in exile. More than 4,500 anti-war protesters arrested in one day in Russia. And that's just a few of the dozens and dozens of headlines coming out of the reporting out of the region. So much talk about a no-fly zone potential, and of all people who explained it really well, Senator Marco Rubio, I think, did a pretty good job, and I heard a lot of the Sunday shows, like almost all of them yesterday while I was starting some more seeds and cleaning up, getting some almost spring cleaning done, getting the grow room ready. Anyway, here is Marco Rubio explaining, I think pretty well, that even though the Ukrainians want this no-fly zone, Zelensky is begging for it. Here's why he thinks can't do it.
Yesterday with President Zelensky, are you and your colleagues now more open to a no-fly zone?
You know, look, a no-fly zone has become a catchphrase. I'm not sure a lot of people fully understand what that means. That means flying AWACS 24 hours a day. That means the willingness to shoot down and engage Russian airplanes in the sky. That means, frankly, you can't put those planes up there unless you're willing to knock out the anti-aircraft systems that the Russians have deployed, and not just in Ukraine, but in Russia and also in Belarus. So basically, a no-fly zone, if people understood what it means World War III. It means starting World War III. So I think there are a lot of things we can do to help Ukraine protect itself, both from airstrikes and missile strikes. But I think that people need to understand what a no-fly zone means. It's not some rule you pass that everybody has to oblige by. It's the willingness to shoot down the aircrafts of the Russian Federation, which is basically the beginning of World War III.
How about this provision of fighter jets? We would provide the fighter jets to Poland, other Eastern European nations. They would send the jets they now have to Ukraine. Do you support that?
I do. If that can be done, that would be great. I do have concerns about a couple things, and that is sort of, can they actually fly them, given the amount of anti-aircraft capabilities that the Russians possess and continue to have deployed in the region. By the way, yesterday was a terrible day for the Russian Air Force. They're losing. They don't have air control either there. But generally speaking, it's something I'd be supportive of, and we should do what we can to help them.
I don't think that Marco Rubio said anything too out of the mainstream for what I've heard about the no-fly zone, as well as the whole deal with having Poland send fighter jets to Ukraine and then the U.S. sends Poland planes to refill them. That certainly sounds like a NATO action, or could be interpreted thusly, but apparently that's what we think we can do. There was a lot of talk about that deal with the planes and the no-fly zone. Here is Anthony Blinken, the Secretary of State, who's getting a lot of credit right now for how he's played this and handled this terrible, terrible hand that they've been dealt and are dealing with.
NATO has said none of its 30 members are willing to set up a no-fly zone. President Biden has been very clear he has no interest in that or combat troops. But what more can the United States do here? If, for instance, the Polish government, a NATO member, wants to send fighter jets, does that get a green light from the U.S., or are you afraid that will escalate tension?
No, that gets a green light. In fact, we're talking with our Polish friends right now about what we might be able to do to backfill their needs if, in fact, they choose to provide these fighter jets to the Ukrainians. What can we do? How can we help to make sure that they get something to backfill the planes that they're handing over to the Ukrainians? We're in very active discussions with them about that. Look, I've been in Europe for the last couple of days, working closely, as always, with our allies and partners at NATO, the European Union, the G7 countries, and all of us together are continuing to take steps to increase the pressure on Russia through additional sanctions, all of which are very actively under discussion and will be implemented in the coming days, as well as taking further steps to give the Ukrainians what they need to defend themselves against the Russian aggression.
All right, there he is, Anthony Blinken, Secretary of State. I think I counted he was on at least 3, maybe 4 of the Sunday shows. I think that was Meet the Press, right? All right, now here is the White House director of the National Economic Council, just kind of counting up how there has been so much economic damage done to Russia as a result of their invasion. His name is Brian Deese. He was on TV yesterday.
The ruble is down 40%. Their stock market is closed indefinitely because they are in functional default. So their economy is feeling the pain of this coordinated effort, and we are ratcheting up. You've seen announcements from the White House and from our allies in just the last couple of days, additional sanctions imposed on additional oligarchs, an effort to go after the spoils, the yachts and the properties of those oligarchs. And we will continue to consider and take actions that do exactly what the president promised.
All right, Brian Deese yesterday talking about how the Biden administration is handling this in terms of sanctions and the results of them. He's the White House director of National Economic Council. Now, here is Ian Bremmer. He fashions himself a foreign policy expert. Ian Bremmer from the Eurasia Group. He was on MSNBC's Velshi, where Ali Velshi was reporting from the border of Ukraine and Hungary, I think. And he asked Ian Bremmer, is there any way out for Putin? I think. Here it is.
Ian, is there any possibility in which Vladimir Putin backs down, is able to save face and get out of this thing, or ends up not the president of Russia?
Look, on the first, because there is no scenario in which Putin is not dramatically weakened in his position, domestic politics, his economic position, and his geopolitical position in Europe, there's no circumstance in which that occurs compared to where he was before he started the invasion. I think a voluntary climb down is extremely unlikely. Now, that doesn't mean that he can't be removed from power. And there are a lot of people clearly that have to be unhappy with what Putin is doing with Russia right now, including inside his own Security Council. But what I will say is that the likelihood that Putin is removed from power is going to be extremely small until right after it happens. There's really no way to assess it differently.
All right, that's Ian Bremmer with Velshi on MSNBC. He also talked to our friend Ruth Ben-Ghiat over the weekend, and I thought this was interesting. So here it is.
It occurred to me that we sit and have what some people think are relatively quaint conversations about books being pulled from libraries. And we're not going the way of Russia, but this is the issue, that once you pass the point of telling people what they can or shouldn't read, you get to the point where you can just tell them the lie yourself, and they've got no choice. They've got nothing with which to compare it to determine whether your leaders are lying to you or telling you the truth.
Well, that's right. And of course, that's where not only literature, but journalists become direct targets. And Russia has killed dozens of journalists for telling the truth. And especially any kind of wartime scenario makes them very vulnerable. Let's not forget that Anna Politkovskaya was killed in 2006. Investigative journalists for talking about war crimes in Chechnya. But the key thing here is when you can't describe the Russian invasion as an invasion, and you can't use that word. You have to use special military operation. What the point of this is to preserve the myth of Russian victimhood, because Putin for 20 years has been playing on this idea that Russia is persecuted by the West, he's victimized by the West. So Russia gets to be Russia can never be the aggressor if you don't talk about an invasion.
All right, that's just a small sampling of the analysis out there. Wish I had time for more, but there are other things happening, including the Vice President of the United States, Kamala Harris, went down to Selma to stand with civil rights and community leaders at the Edmund Pettus Bridge, because it was 57 years ago that civil rights protesters and leaders marched for the freedom to vote. She writes on Twitter, if we all continue to work together, to fight together, we will secure those rights. If we are truly to honor the legacy of those who marched in Selma on Bloody Sunday, we demand that Congress pass federal voting rights legislation. And then tweeted, those who marched in Selma marched for the freedom to vote and all the rights and freedoms that voting unlocks. Economic justice, social justice, racial justice. We must do the same. Here's a little bit of the vice president with many others down there over the weekend. On Sunday, 57 years since Bloody Sunday.
Remember, it took 3 tries for the marchers to cross the bridge. It took their sweat, their tears, their blood. It took their resilience, their determination, and their courage. And yes, it even took the protection of the National Guard and federal marshals. In a moment of great uncertainty, those marchers pressed forward and they crossed. We must do the same. We must lock our arms and march forward. We will not let setbacks stop us. We know that honoring the legacy of those who marched then demands that we continue to push Congress to pass federal voting rights legislation. And it also demands we continue to push the Senate to not allow an arcane rule to deny us this sacred right.
Vice President went on to highlight the accomplishment that it will be, hopefully, for the Biden administration and for progress that President Biden nominated a black woman to be the next Supreme Court justice. Here's that part from Kamala Harris at the bridge in Selma yesterday.
Just think, last week, President Biden made history when he nominated the first black woman, Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson, to the highest court in our land. The court where decisions are made about the constitutional rights and liberties and freedoms of every American to generational effect. And I'll tell you what I think you know. Judge Jackson is a phenomenal jurist with a record of excellence, a record that proves her commitment not only to public service, but to equal justice and equal rights. And as she makes history, Judge Jackson, like us all, stands on the shoulders of giants.
There you go. Yesterday, Bloody Sunday. And for some reason, the Secretary of Transportation, Pete Buttigieg, Mayor Pete, he was there too. You might wonder, why would the Secretary of Transportation be at an event commemorating and working towards racial justice?
Now, some are asking what transportation could possibly have to do with racial justice. Some have been asking that very pointedly. So it's all the more fitting that we're here at this bridge, this piece of infrastructure that became a battleground in the struggle for equal rights. This place that reminds us how transportation and civil rights have always been related. From the ships that carried so many into bondage, to the ferries and wagons of the Underground Railroad that transported so many to freedom, from the train car at issue in Plessy versus Ferguson, to the bus where Rosa Parks decided to keep her seat. We are reminded again and again how deep is that relationship between the physical movement of human beings and the social movement that changed this country.
All right. Secretary of Transportation Pete Buttigieg nailing it with that speech at the bridge yesterday. Edmund Pettus Bridge, 57 years since Bloody Sunday. All right, let me change gears for you one more time, and it's about the February job numbers. They came out on Friday, and they were apparently pretty good. 678,000 jobs estimated to have been added in February. Unemployment ticking, I don't know. It's going down to 3.8%. Good news for the country. Testament to our resilience, tweets Senator Sheldon Whitehouse. We have more to do, so this is a sign to keep pushing. And here is the Secretary of Labor with his thick Boston accent, my old friend, the old mayor of Boston, Marty Walsh, Secretary of Labor, on those job numbers.
We saw the rate of pay go up 5.1% year over year. But what we're doing here at the Department of Labor is really thinking about creating more apprentice and pre-apprentice programs into all industries and more investments in workforce development and training because there's still a way to go in some communities. You know, the black community, Latino community, and women are still, in a lot of ways, haven't come back fully, and in some cases are being underpaid.
All right, that's the former mayor of Boston. That's how I knew him and interviewed him last at the Aspen Ideas Fest. But I interviewed him a couple times. Good guy, smells great. He's a sober guy. He's a good guy, and I really like him. He's the Secretary of Labor now. And so let's switch gears. I said one more. That would be the last one. But no, I got one more because let's go from the Boston accent to this amazing Northern Irish accent from virologist Paul Dupre. And he was on 60 Minutes last night. I thought this was really interesting. If you can get past his amazing accent, but he was on last night talking about where we're at with coronavirus and where we are going. And I thought this was both insightful and really entertaining, again, because of his accent.
It's been about 1 year since we last spoke for 60 Minutes. Is the pandemic over?
The pandemic is not over, but we're in a very different place today than we were 1 year ago.
How so?
There have been multiply more variants, but we're moving in a direction where there are not as many people who are in hospital because of the disease, and we've got many more people vaccinated. And we understand a lot about first shots, second shots, and now boosters. So it's a totally different landscape.
Dupre, born in Northern Ireland, is head of the Center for Vaccine Research at the University of Pittsburgh Medical Center. He's hopeful the virus will continue to mutate into a milder form. Is it possible that the coronaviruses that now cause the common cold long ago began as fiercely, as dangerous, as deadly as SARS-CoV-2, and that over time it became weaker and weaker? Now we have the common cold.
Oh, I would say it's more than possible. I would say it's very likely. But we just have to wait and see where the virus ends up. And that's just good science. Scientists follow the virus, keep a close eye on it, and we understand how that virus changes over time and where it will go.
Yes, where it will go. I love it. And really interesting and insightful. Also, 60 Minutes last night, they sat down with the director of the CDC, Rochelle Walensky, who told Americans they could shed their masks if they were fully vaccinated, of course. Then Delta came and the CDC had to walk back its guidance. Now Rochelle Walensky shared with 60 Minutes how she thinks the CDC will gain back America's trust. Good luck. Here it is.
You hear the word endemic a lot. What exactly does that mean?
You're at a steady state. Your pandemic or your disease is neither increasing nor decreasing.
So will there be a moment where it's at such a low level that even though it's still on every continent, say, we're not calling it a pandemic anymore?
I think we'll get there. You know, I do think that we will get to a place with this disease where we live with a relatively low level all year long, and that maybe we have some surges during respiratory virus season. Those surges are annoying, and for some, they will likely be tragic, but they are not to the tune of 2,000 and 3,000 deaths a day. I think we live that way with influenza. Yeah.
Dr. Walensky has learned to be cautious after telling fully vaccinated Americans back in May 2021 they could take off their masks.
Once you are fully vaccinated, 2 weeks after your last dose, you can shed your mask.
But the party only lasted a few months. New CDC research during a surge of the Delta variant forced her to tell the country that masks should go back on.
I will never forget the gut punch on that Friday night when I first saw the data out of Barnstable County, Massachusetts, that demonstrated that there were vaccinated people that were transmitting it to other people. We said we have to put our masks back on.
Do you think communicating "we don't know" was done well enough to the public from the very beginning?
You know,
or it may change.
There were so many times where we were optimistic. There were so many times where we didn't know. And since my getting here, what I said is we're going to lead with the science. The implication was that science was black and white. And in fact, in an ever-evolving virus and a 2-year-long pandemic, the science isn't always black and white. It's oftentimes shades of gray.
But from the point of view of the taxi cab driver who drove me here a couple of days ago, he remembers it as they told us you could take your mask off, and then they changed their mind.
Right.
One recent poll showed that less than half the American public trusts the CDC when it comes to advice about the virus. Do you take it personally?
I certainly don't love to see statistics like that, but I think they will get better as we emerge from this pandemic.
All right, 2 clips from 60 Minutes. How about that? Rochelle Walensky, CDC director. And now finally, let's go to NBC and listen to a little bit of the Weekend Update jokes from Saturday Night Live this past weekend.
Germany is now joining the EU to send arms to Ukraine, which is the first time Germany has ramped up military production since that little 6-year gap in their history books. French President Emmanuel Macron said that after a tense 90-minute call with Vladimir Putin, he's convinced that the worst is yet to come. Man, it's amazing how much suffering could have been avoided if Putin was just a few inches taller.
Senator Lindsey Graham, who gives this exact same look at the urinal, created a controversy on Twitter by suggesting that Russians should end the war in Ukraine by assassinating Vladimir Putin. It is a shocking, disgusting example of Lindsey Graham being kind of right about something.
Governors in several states, including New Hampshire, Ohio, and Utah, have banned the sale of Russian-made vodka. No word yet on brides. Many of the members of Congress attending the State of the Union wore blue and yellow to show their support for Ukraine, while Kamala Harris wore all brown to do what she's done for the last year, disappear into the background.
Florida Governor Ron Desantis seen here being told someone's pronouns. DeSantis yelled at students behind him at an indoor event to take off their masks, saying, "Stop with this COVID theater." And there's nothing more on brand for conservatives than a dad screaming at boys to give up theater.
Starting on Monday, New York City will no longer require bars and restaurants to pretend to look at vaccination cards. The city will be lifting its vaccine mandate for indoor dining and events. Finally, said the next variant.
Oh, that's good. That was very good. Good job from Colin Jost and Michael Che and the writers at Saturday Night Live. And now it's time to get to all of the rest of those headlines in what I call the news dump. Everything else rapid fire style, brought to you by Indeed.com, by the way. Let's see what jingle Pete Coe has worked up for us today. Guy cranks them out.
Non-native spiders galore, Georgia in a huff. They have little web parachutes on today's news dump.
Oh, yeah, this is an upsetting story about spiders, parachuting spiders that are going to cover the entire East Coast. If that's not your jam, I'm sorry that I had to tell you about it, and hopefully you won't have any visits from them. All right, what do I got for you on today's news dump? The Batman, did you see it? Did anybody go over the weekend? I think Eve and I are going to try to go on Wednesday, so no spoilers. $128 million on its first weekend, the second biggest pandemic debut for a film. And the best one, apparently, was Spider-Man No Way Home, which debuted at the end of 2021 and got $260 million on its opening weekend. So I think that tells you the age-old question. People like Spider-Man more than Batman. Does that answer it? I'm not one of them because I prefer my superheroes without powers, but that's just me. Speaking of superheroes, how about that armada of drivers calling themselves the People's Convoy that have circled Washington, D.C. for more than a few hours on Sunday to protest pandemic restrictions, even though, I mean, are there still pandemic restrictions? Apparently they're going to drive around on Monday as well. Their goal, they said, was to be a huge pain. They said that. Organizers said their goal is to be a huge pain. On Sunday, the disruption they caused was apparently fairly minimal, though the convoy of hundreds of trucks, cars, and SUVs started out in a deliberately slow-moving formation that stretched roughly 30 miles. It became diluted after merging with normal Beltway traffic. So we'll see what happens with that. And the convoy organizer said that they're not going to enter the district. Instead, demonstrators are planning to increase the number of trips around the Beltway each day to pressure lawmakers and public officials. So we'll continue to follow that story and those people and try to understand how they make a living if they're able to just drive around all the time. I don't get that. I mean, there's a lot of things I'd like to be at protests full time, just driving around. But I mean, don't you have to work? I don't understand. I mean, how much freedom have you lost that you don't even have to work? You just drive around. How hard is your life? What are you protesting? Jesus. All right, here's a super weird headline. Box of human heads intended for medical research stolen in Denver. That's all I've got for you. I'm not going to read the details of the story. If you want it, you can go to any of the Denver media outlets. Or just, I bet you, Google human head stolen, and you'll probably find that story. Sony has unveiled its new gold-plated Walkman, folks. Sony announced 2 new Walkman music players for the audiophile with an eye for nostalgia and some very deep pockets, is how the story is written. They're $1,600 or $3,200. They have Wi-Fi capability. They can read MP3. What is this? Why is anybody getting a Walkman? Why not just buy a MacBook, for God's sake, for that much money? Ridiculous. Anyway, check out the Sony Walkman that they are re-releasing. At least one gas station now in California is getting close to $7 a gallon for regular gasoline. The average price of a gallon of gas is $5.24. I'm supposed to be picking up a used Chevy Volt that I can plug into my house today. We'll see tomorrow if I actually have that car, but more and more people are going to be buying electric cars every time gas spikes like this. A New Mexico man has gone home after 550 days in the hospital for COVID-19. How about that? He's been discharged from the hospital about a year and a half after being admitted. Donnell Hunter is his name. He was honored with a police escort when he finally left the hospital after 550 days. Let's see what else. TikTok blocks users in Russia from posting videos. Oh, man, no more of those great Russian TikToks. You've probably heard about former president, disgraced president Donald Trump joking about how the U.S. should put the Chinese flag on an F-22 fighter jets and then bomb the shit out of Russia and then just let China and Russia fight each other. He actually said that out loud over the weekend. So, well, here's some good news headlines to end this out. City trees and soil are sucking more carbon out of the atmosphere than we thought. California officials approved a plan to crack down on microplastics polluting the ocean. A new cancer therapy completely destroys advanced ovarian and colorectal tumors in 6 days. I don't know how true that headline could be. Ukraine received a truckload of Starlink terminals from Elon Musk for uninterrupted internet. California erected solar panels over a canal to save huge supply of water from evaporation. And a former Marine drove 1,000 miles to the Ukraine border in a minibus loaded with supplies, toys, and blankets for refugees. And always look for the helpers, right? There is your good news headlines here on the News Dump. Brought to you today by Indeed.com. This week the show is, not sure why I said that like Yoda. This week the show is brought to you by Indeed.com. You're ready to take your business to the next level. You know that you are, and you need the right team to make that happen. Well, Indeed makes it easy to hire and build a team with the right skills to make your dreams a reality. So if you're hiring, you need Indeed, folks. Indeed is the hiring partner. You can attract, interview, and hire all in one place. And Indeed is the only job site where you're guaranteed to find quality applicants that meet your must-have requirements, or else you don't pay. So instead of spending hours on multiple job sites hoping to find candidates with the right skills, you need one powerful hiring partner that can help you do it all. And Indeed partners with you on every step of the hiring process. Find great talent through time-saving tools like Indeed Instant Match, assessments, and virtual interviews. Start hiring right now with a $75 sponsored job credit to upgrade your job post at Indeed.com/standup. This offer is valid through March 31st. Like I said, go to Indeed.com/standup to claim your $75 credit right now. Indeed.com/standup. You're ready to make the leap and turn your passion into profit. You need the right team to make it happen. Indeed.com/standup now. All right. Well, I have a great conversation with Michael Cohen coming up, and we talk about Ukraine. He makes a lot of sense, as always. I enjoyed that conversation. But first, I caught up with Maura Quint for our Monday chat. I love starting the week with her as my first guest because we always cover a lot of ground, and Maura is always a fun conversation. And so if you don't know, she's awesome on Twitter at Behind Your Back. She is the Tax March, the co-founder of Tax March. She's now at Americans for Tax Fairness, where she's a campaign director. She's been a contributor to The New Yorker, to The Onion, Words and McSweeney. She is absolutely hilarious and thoughtful, and that's why I pretty much talk to her every week and kick off the week with her. Follow her on Twitter at Behind Your Back and listen to her podcast that she's now doing with her friend, My So-Called Book Club, about young adult books that they loved in the 80s and 90s. As always, here we go. Maura Quint with the jingle from Pete Coe.
When regressive taxation has gone too far and your Bloody Mary's just not up to par, it's Maura Mondays.
Yeah, it's that time of week. It's Monday, and there's always something to look forward to every day if you really look hard enough. But Mondays, we almost always get to talk to Maura Quint. Hi, how are you?
Hi,
listening to that theme song just brings me such joy.
Yeah.
Every single time. Just every single time. It's amazing.
I'm so glad to hear that. Pete Coe will be very happy.
All the Petes are good. All the Petes are good.
Well, Pete Rose was really
not so good. I didn't follow that one. Not great.
Not a great guy.
Did he touch children? How bad was it?
I didn't touch. No, he gambled on his own team, but he also I think he was the best dad either. But anyway, I could think of other bad Petes, I'm sure. So
I'm sure too, but I was trying,
Did you take advantage of the climate change? It was like 70 today. It's gonna be like 70 tomorrow. It's the weather is insane. Did you do something with it?
Yeah, it's beautiful. It's wonderful. You wake up and you just feel that warm air, and then you can set yourself into an existential crisis and panic all day, but in a pleasant weather while you do it. It's wonderful. I hated it. I really hated it. I went on like a super long walk, and which was nice, but the whole time, every single step was just kind of like, this is wrong. This is wrong.
You really were.
This is wrong.
You were thinking about that most of the time.
Yeah, I think because I had thought maybe this weekend I might try to go skiing. Like originally that was kind of, like, oh, maybe I'll be able to go skiing this weekend. I haven't gone skiing at all. And I have like a gift certificate for a mountain. So I was kind of like, yay, maybe I can use it. And instead I was doing my climate change march.
Why don't you go in the warm weather?
Because it's for a place that's by me, which is not a good place. Like I'm not in Colorado. Like it's not where you can be like, it's beautiful and sunny, but I'm skiing. No, this is like the hills are about as high as, an average house basically. And if it gets warm, it just melts. It's not pleasant. And then the best they can do is try and like freeze it overnight or something. I don't know. And then you're just ice skating down the mountain, which is a different skill and a useful skill, but it's not really quite skiing. It's a little bit different. Well,
at least you got out and enjoyed the weather. That always is. I feel like it's a game changer. I was out as much as I could be today, but then I was thinking less about climate change. I was listening to all the Sunday shows, so I was thinking all about World War Z or 3 or the Putin's war. How much are you paying attention to that news?
See, I'm jealous because you at least were in a winter. It was nuclear winter, but at least your head was still in a winter, whereas mine had moved completely into next season. I'm paying. I mean, it's funny actually. A friend of mine wrote me the other day and was just like, "Have you just been doom scrolling nonstop lately?" And I had to stop for a moment and realize, like, oh, everyone just doesn't do that every single day all the time. Like, right, that's a new thing for some people, but yeah, it's hard to look away from, and it's really frightening and upsetting. And I know an artist who is in the Ukraine, so I've been sort of in contact with her, and just hearing from her what she's going through has been, harrowing. Anytime you can have that immediate personal connection from, someone telling you exactly what they're going through, it hits you a little bit harder, I think.
Yeah, I saw you tweet something about that. So do you know her, or why is she staying? Is she trying to leave?
Well, so she's Ukrainian. I know her just online. I think, every year around the fall and stuff, I tend to do threads where I shout out artists. And I started following her years and years ago just because I loved her art. And she was one of the first artists that I followed. And she was just this really interesting person. And her artwork is like not a style that I'm typically drawn to, but for some reason, her stuff really captures me. And so, yeah, I just sort of knew her online, and I would chat with her a little bit and certainly tell her how great I thought her paintings and her drawings, I should say, are. And then out of nowhere in January, I don't know, maybe I had said something that I was like a little low or whatever. She wrote me and she was like, I want to send you something. And she sent me a book of her art, which is gorgeous. And so I have had on my table, this envelope that I'm holding up that people can't see, but it's a real envelope. Pete can vouch for this. It's an actual envelope that exists, but it's been on my table ever since because it had her return address on it. And I was like, oh, this was so amazing of her. It really made my day. I got this great art book. I'm going to send her back a package of some sort. I don't really make things, but like something, I'm going to send her back a fun, thank you. And I haven't gotten around to it. And now it's like, I don't know. Can I send a fun light package to the Ukraine. I don't think I can. I don't think Hershey's Kisses are like really all that, don't have the same kind of punch as they would before. And I don't know that she would, even if mail were getting through, I don't know that she would get it because she might need to flee. She's right now in a place that is still considered safe. All of her family has come to where she is. And she said they have a plan for if that area becomes under attack, but she's planning to stay there otherwise.
Wow. Well, that's thoughtful of you, of course. I'm unsurprised. But yeah, the idea that mail could get to people right now somehow in a war and during this invasion would be probably unlikely, but still amazing thought. And I mean, keep us up to date on her. Now I kind of feel invested and interested, and it's interesting to be connected to somebody who's going through such a situation and somehow be an outlet. Is the communication hard? How are they communicating right now?
I mean, I speak to her via Twitter DMs. She seems like she's got, Wi-Fi and power. So I guess that's really all you need for that. And I know she's also posting along, and I'll share again for anybody who's listening on my page so they can follow her. Her name is Daria. But she's been sharing on her Instagram in particular. She'll share these kind of long passages of what she's going through. And
you mentioned before I hit record, I asked you, and I'm asking everybody this. How, if at all, are you talking about this with your kids, age appropriately, I guess? And do you start the conversation, or do they start it with you? And you mentioned that you actually brought it up to your older one earlier. Well, why, and what did you say?
Yeah, so every Sunday night, actually, I have two children, and their dad and I do one-on-one night where we each have dinner, just us and one of our children, and we swap each week so that we get like some time just to talk through stuff. Because usually with siblings, like they're always the two of them together, and as a parent, you always have the two of them. So this is a way to try and like spend some targeted time. So I had my 10-year-old tonight for dinner, and we were just talking, and I was just curious if he even heard anything, or like, if it had entered his world. So I asked him if he knew anything about what was going on with Russia and Ukraine. And he said they're fighting each other, right? And so I was like, well, that's a both sides-ish sort of way to put it. But, more like Russia has invaded this country, and the Ukrainians are trying to fight off the Russians and get them out of their country. And, I didn't really go into it too much more than that, but I because I had this envelope on my table too, I showed him the book of artwork that my friend had sent. Also, again, just to kind of give sort of a little bit of a personal connection to my 10-year-old, because he really loves, like, the kid has spent most of the pandemic watching like war documentaries.
Really?
He gets really into that stuff. Like like in a 10-year-old way, like he likes knowing the planes and the various types of like arsenals and things. He gets really interested in that. And I think it doesn't really connect to him sometimes that it's people. It's like not just cool planes, right, and, explosions. It's human beings. And so I wanted to just sort of kind of ground him a little bit for a moment in the fact that it's people. But I mean, without terrifying him, which is not easy to do.
Yeah. Really, that's why I ask your take, and any parent's sake. I don't think there's, too many wrong answers. I think that, I mean, there probably are some like, we're going to all be vaporized tomorrow. Good night, sweetheart, is probably not the best advice.
Probably not. But you know what? Like, so that maybe some kids would really respond to that. That might actually be a great thing.
Or, hundreds of thousands of people are going to die, but not in our part of the planet. Like, it'll just be Eastern Europe. Don't worry about it. That's probably not a great one. But I think the idea that, I mean, it's not unlike so many other things, including just life things like sex or any other kind of violence that you want to talk about with your kids. They're going to learn it anyway. I mean, my daughter,
sex or any other kind of violence. Got it. Okay. Just needed to pause on that, Pete.
So I want to talk to you girls about violent sex.
I was going to say, I know we're trying to talk about a very serious subject, but can we get dick slapping in there somehow? I feel like as long as we can do that, it's okay.
I think that was one of the activities during violent sex, but let's leave that for the metaverse. No, I was going to say that my kids learn, like my younger one, Julia, was like asking me all these questions based on what she'd seen on TikTok. It was all over TikTok. So point is, they're going to learn stuff anyway. So bringing it up and hearing how you bring it up and how you handle their questions, I think is always a great thing to share with other parents. So.
Yeah, no, I think it's fascinating. And I do think it really varies kid to kid. They, you know your kid and you know what they're capable of, or you hopefully have some idea of what they're capable of taking in and understanding and how they might respond. Some kids are very, very sensitive. Some kids, not so. I know that it would be it would be a different conversation if it was with my 8-year-old as well, because he internalizes stuff and he doesn't communicate it back out. And so you have to be almost much more careful what you give him, because it'll kind of stick in there and you won't know what's going on for a really long time. So that's trickier. But my 10-year-old he'll talk about it. If something bothers him or whatever, he'll actually respond, which is nice.
Yeah, I that's why I prefer the 10-year-old.
Yeah, no, I mean, look, he's got his supporters. The 8-year-old has his, hopefully in general, they won't go to full blown war, but it's a very shaky detente right now.
I wanted to mention this one thing that you shared on Twitter, because I'm kind of hung up on this as well. On all the Sunday shows and throughout media and conversations about this war, the one question that keeps getting asked in conversation is about a no-fly zone. And and so you shared this tweet about how there's a real difference. There's a polling question, and there's a difference in how people respond to the issue of a no-fly zone based, of course, on how the question is asked. So if you want to say anything about that, or polling in general, why it makes such a difference the way a question is asked when something's explained, and why that matters.
I don't think that I can sit here and be like, polling is bullshit, because so much of the work that I do requires me to recite back polling. Right. But I will say, from a personal point of view, polling is certainly something that can be manipulated wildly, depending on how things are asked. And that is something I think in general people need to be really careful about when they look at polls or they hear about polls, paying any attention to the methodology that was used and exactly what the wording was of the questions. And in this case, I mean, one of the reasons I shared it was because if you heard me last week answer your questions, as I said, I am not an expert on any of this stuff. Foreign policy is just never, not for 20 years, something that I was really paying close attention to in any way that would give me any sort of analytical insight. And so the first time I heard something about a no-fly zone, without giving it much thought, it was sort of like, yeah, that makes sense. You don't want those, you don't want the planes bombing people. So yeah, there should be a no-fly zone. Now, give me 5 more seconds to read the next thing and understand, exactly. Then it's like, oh yeah, but if someone is, if we're enforcing a no-fly zone, we are now at war, and it is changing the entire dynamic of this situation. Maybe I would have gotten there. Maybe I would have thought that through, or maybe I would have just answered real quick and gone about my day and then ordered my coffee and, more likely that's what I would do. And so, in this particular one, I find it incredibly important that people are very, very clear about how they ask this question and that they explain what it means, because I think we've seen there's a little bit of a consent factory in place here when it comes to war. There are a lot of people in charge of our country who get real, real excited about war. They get real gung-ho and they want to do it. And in order to do that, they want to be able to lean on, the public demanded that we do it. And so when you have polling that is misrepresentative, that's not being clear, it's creating more consent for this sort of manufactured enthusiasm. And that is incredibly dangerous. It's always bad, but right now it's absolutely terrifying.
That is so well explained, and I'm so glad I asked you about it, because it really does matter for all of the reasons that you said. And I've just been watching media, a lot of times I think journalists, even if they think they're doing the right thing, they ask questions in such a way, as Kelly O'Donnell did on to Jen Psaki. She's like, is the U.S. just going to sit here and watch while people die? And it was like, the U.S. is doing tons and tons of stuff that nobody's sitting there and watching. And it's almost like you're rooting for there to be a conflict so that there can be better ratings. Journalists make their names, their credibility, their reputations are oftentimes burnt in our memories from their foreign or conflict reporting, your Anderson Coopers, your Dan Rathers, whatever. But I feel like that there's a problem with that too. And journalists need to be careful with their questions and how they talk about it.
Yeah. I mean, there are a lot of problems with that. And then of course, we're in the forever war, right? Like there's the element as well of, I'm very, very frightened for the Ukraine and for the broader Eastern European countries as well, because I don't know that Putin doesn't seem to be a real trustworthy guy who's going to just sort of like only target one thing and that's it. It seems like there's potential for a lot of terror amongst many of these places. I'm also very worried for many, many other countries that have been in these circumstances for much longer. I mean, this is unfortunately new here. It's not new globally.
Right.
So if you're so hungry for war, there's plenty that you can turn to and look and see and go report and be very, very loud about if you want. Like you don't need to drum any up. This isn't a rarity. This isn't like this once in a lifetime chance to go.
Right.
Unfortunately, it's happening constantly.
I mean, people, speaking of which, like warriors are joining this war. People who want to fight in conflict. People who have fought in other wars have been signing up and going to Ukraine and packing bags with all of their weapons and stuff and going to join the fight. I mean, what kind of person does that? That's a tough choice.
I have no idea. My guess, though, is there's probably a lot of different psychological profiles that would fit that, because there's probably just this absolute, just the worst version of whatever you think of that, this sort of cowboy mentality of just, packing up all my guns. But there's probably, I would imagine there's some people, too, who just, for whatever reason, feel tremendously compelled for some sort of, I don't know if I want to say
probably
moral,
and hopefully also have a lot of training in for military conflicts, meaning it's probably something to think about. Like, I've got all this training in this type of a conflict, and I could be useful, but do I, should I go to this conflict? I don't know. It's a strange choice, but a lot of people are seemingly making it. So
it is a really, really fascinating one. It is. I'm not sure what to make of it. And but the other thing too, is that I guess there's an element, because like I said, I've never been paying very, very close attention to this stuff. This one is really difficult to avoid. It feels very much like it, not that I want to avoid it per se, but even if I weren't seeking it out, it is in my line of sight at all times. But I have no idea, when we look to other global conflicts, has this always been happening? Were these types of people always going off to various wars in places and we just didn't hear about it? I have no idea. Or is this something new and rare?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's different case by case. Depends on what the conflict is and whether or not you believe fighting it. But that's an interesting development. All right, let's change gears completely, Maura, and talk about how things are, even though we're seeing this conflict unfold in Ukraine, things are returning to somewhat normal for at least Americans when it comes to COVID, or aren't they? What are your thoughts on that? I think we mentioned it last week, and I want to just talk about this thing that you shared on Twitter about going back to work and how that is changing, or it certainly needs to change. People coming up with a kind of new standards as to what they expect. But how are you feeling about COVID and the kind of return to, there's no such thing as normal. I keep forgetting to say that, but back to something.
Well, I mean, as a nation, we don't tend to juggle multiple crises at once. We don't really tend to have that ability. It's a one thing or the other, which is, one of the first pictures that I was seeing out of Ukraine were these images of families and kids in bomb shelters.
Yeah.
And they were wearing masks. And my first thought was just, I don't think there are so many Americans who will not even be able to handle that picture. It doesn't make sense. It's one crisis or the other. You can't have both at the same time. And they're they're juggling both. They are being, which makes sense. You can't get very sick when you are in a war zone. There's not going to be a lot of help immediately available to you. So you need to be even more careful. Here in the States, I feel like, oh, well, we got that Ukraine thing we're looking at. So that's all we can see. I don't know. Is there anything else? Like when I go out, I'm definitely the only one wearing a mask. Not the only one. There's usually like one or two other people, but it's not something that in my area, at least, anyone's paying attention to at all.
Your kids?
They just took down the mask mandate.
So they don't have to wear them in school?
No, my kids are still wearing them, but I don't know for how long that will go. I mean, and, they're autonomous beings in school, so I think they're wearing them. They're going to school with them. We had a conversation about them wearing them, but like, if all of the other classmates are not, are they really keeping them on? I'm not sure.
Yeah, that would be a hard thing just socially if everybody else is not wearing them and you're the only one wearing. I wonder how kids are going to treat each other over that.
Yeah, I'm curious too.
I mean, like, who cares if you want to wear a mask? Wear a mask. Like, whatever. How does that? I don't know. But as a kid, maybe they're gonna you find anything to ridicule and marginalize other kids for. But we'll see how that happens.
We'll see.
As it plays out.
I don't know.
So going back to work, though, where is this tweet? Now I can't find it. This idea of go ahead. What were you gonna say?
I was just saying it's a thread that someone shared of like all the various reasons that people don't want to go back to work,
right?
And don't want to go back into the offices. And certainly, I at least saw one person reply like the only reason to compel people to go back in the offices is to protect commercial real estate, which certainly there are commercial real estate interests at play here. That's definitely true.
Here it is. Reasons why people don't want to return to offices. Commuting, obviously. Dress codes. Oh. Who's getting upset about the dress code? Who are these people?
Well, I mean, I think we all are now because we can wear pajama pants. Like being told you can't wear pajama pants and slippers anymore. I mean, there's offices with more strict dress codes than just no pajamas, but like that alone is just kind of like, do I really? I have got to like make sure I have a clean button-down shirt and whatever,
The cost of buying lunch. So that's always generally more if you eat out, I guess, is what they're saying, as opposed to eating at home. The hassle of packing a lunch. I think those people you're good people. You're better people. You're healthier people. You're saving more money. You're smarter. You plan for things. But I also, I guess I'm just jealous of those who pack a lunch.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think
jealous.
I haven't packed a lunch in a decade. Granted, I just work out of my shed now. But when I used to go to work, when I used to go into the city every day, I mean, I never packed a lunch. I don't think
I didn't either. Actually, I pretty much no. In fact, I never did.
I ate
ever
much less healthy too, because I ate way more bread because you could get the greatest sandwich ever anywhere you wanted. In New York.
What's the greatest sandwich ever?
I mean, it doesn't matter if whatever it is to you, you can have it made at one of those sandwich shops, right? Where they have the salad sandwich shop.
Mm-hmm. It's got fruit on it, doesn't it? I know you love fruit on things.
No, I'm not a sane person. The necessity of code switching. What's that about? You don't want to go in and have to act a way that is not comfortable or normal to you because you're with these people?
Yeah, that's exactly it. That's exactly it.
Distractions from open office layouts. Yeah, I completely agree with the distractions at work. It's really hard to get stuff done at work if you are in one of those kind of layouts. Unless you have an office with a door, you're not getting shit done. Especially if you're really well liked like I was.
Of course, yeah. Everyone's stopping by to just offer you candy and flowers and tickets.
Pete, what's going on with you? Nothing. I'm just trying to get this email done for the last 20 minutes.
There's no way that you weren't the guy who was actually the one doing that, just stopping at all of the desks along the way.
Not only that, when people walked by me, I actually stood up. Hey, Mike.
That makes perfect sense. Have you ever seen What We Do in the Shadows? Because there's a character, Colin Robinson, the energy vampire, and I think you should watch it and then report back to me.
Are you saying I'm an energy vampire?
No, I would never say that. I'm just, I just brought it up for no reason. There's no correlation. It was just in my head. I thought I should say this out loud.
And finally, reasons why people don't want to return to offices. poorly ventilated meeting rooms. And then they end it with commuting, even though they started it with commuting. Poorly ventilated meeting rooms. I never thought about that, but yeah, that is misery.
Yeah.
Those conference rooms where it's just you're locked in there.
Yeah, and all your germs are just there and everyone can spit at one another. It's great.
But what you said around this is you wrote, I'm for remote offices for a lot of reasons, but I want to stress it's very important that if and when an office goes remote and infrastructure costs get shifted onto the employee, electric bills, heat, AC, using your cell phone, etc., employees must get increased compensation for it. Who is being fleeced? What are you talking about?
It is a tremendous overhead cost to run an office. You are paying for all of the infrastructure. The employer is, presumably, if you're going into an office. They are paying for the rent. They're paying for the climate to be controlled, right, for water, just people going to the bathroom all day. Like there's, having the lights on. These are all costs. And so if you shut down your office and you decide you're going to only go remote, you're shifting those burdens onto your employees. In smaller ways, of course, but it's still meaningful. And not everyone can just swallow that cost, and nor should they be expected to, even if they're able to. It's if people were used to going into the office and working at a work desk with a work computer and a work phone, and you're now asking them to use their own phone or their own computer, then those should be purchased by the office. That shouldn't be a burden onto your employees. You should be helping them with the cost of Wi-Fi if that's something that they need for their job. And I certainly got some responses of like, oh, whatever. You're going to pay for Wi-Fi or your cell phone anyway. Maybe, but that's actually not an assumption that an employer gets to make, nor a question they get to ask. If it is required for the job, then the employer needs to be held accountable for providing it.
Yeah, those are all good points. And so should be the transportation costs if you have to commute. And obviously a lot of companies, offer those benefits and some don't. All right, last question is the wild card. What did you do, see, read, watch, eat, or experience that you want to share?
So many things.
What gives you a wide array of choices?
It really did. So, as I said, I do these one-on-one dinners with each of my kids each week, and they're pretty picky, but they are obsessed with Encanto. I don't know if you've seen it because your daughters are a bit older.
Right, the movie, the
Disney film. They're obsessed. They watch it. Not only do they watch it a bunch, there's like one song that is what's a song where everybody sings in it? I can't think of it, but there's a song where everybody sings in it and has their own parts, and they have assigned everyone parts. So I have parts of it I have to sing, and we sing it all the time. And in the movie is set, I believe, in Colombia, and in it at one point, the mother is making arepas. And so that's what I did tonight. I took my son to a place to get arepas because he'd certainly never had them before.
I don't know what those are.
They are, and forgive me if anyone listening is going, "Oh my God, okay, she's absolutely murdering the pronunciation of this and or the explanation," but I'm going to do my best. It's a corn masa. They're like, I want to say something between like a pancake and a biscuit, basically. And you put filling in the middle, so it almost becomes like a sandwich.
I'm looking at it now. Delicious. It looks delicious.
Yeah, absolutely delicious. And there's, like a sandwich, there's lots of different fillings that one can choose from in the centers.
Arepa, arepa.
Arepa, yeah.
I don't know why I said it like I was in a spelling bee. But
good job. You're going to move on to the next round.
So that's what you made. Pre-cooked cornmeal, water, salt. Oh, wow.
I didn't make it. We went out for it. There's a place
went out
here.
I'm sorry, I wasn't.
Yeah.
They have them where you live. That's wonderful.
I know there's a place called Arepa House, which I'd never been to. So this was like a fun reason to have
you
to go there.
take things out of, in this case, a movie, and you do it in real life with your kids. You're a great mom. I always love to hear. I'm glad that that's what you chose to share with us, because you're always so creative about what to do with your kids and what to make with them and how you celebrate stuff. And they're lucky.
I'm glad you don't see how many hours I let them play video games. Then your opinions might change, but I appreciate it nonetheless.
How many hours do you let them play video games?
Shh, there's no reason to ask that question.
Thank you, Maura, for joining me. And State of the Union, you tweeted it, and I somehow missed you live tweeting it, because I love when you live tweet debates and speeches. It's one of my favorite things. What did you think, though, about what can you say about State of the Union this past week?
I was a bit frustrated by it. I definitely,
I was hear more domestic policy stuff.
I didn't even like a lot of the things that I heard.
Right.
I certainly, the fund the police stuff was very frustrating to me. I mean, it's one thing to feel like saying defund the police is complicated or difficult, which I don't think it is, but I understand the arguments for it. But it's a completely other to say, no, we're going to not only are we going to reject the slogan, but we are going to fully go the other way. We are going to go completely into the right there and just fully concede that issue entirely in a way that was very upsetting. I really hated that. I was a bit frustrated by the tax stuff, simply because I had expected he would go a bit further on that. I mean, but the State of the Union's tricky for me, because it just seems like utter bullshit anyway. It's like, I don't feel like anyone's sitting there taking down stuff from the State of the Union and going like, this is it. This is the actual agenda. This is the real stuff that is being put forth that we're going to follow through on, and you're going to see all these things again. It just is like, this is like a kid in debate who's just like, I have to give a really, really good speech. It doesn't really matter what I say. I just have to get all the points for it.
Right.
Like, that's what it feels like.
Right.
So, it was annoying. I did not enjoy it, but
what about when the two lady Republican congressmen, they yelled out? What did you think of that?
I think that they're disgusting human beings but it's not even just that they're terrible. It is so upsetting to me that they have been voted into office by a large group of people, and that they continue to see support from a large group of people who write them checks, who give them money. It's not just that these are like two crazy assholes. It's that they're just the tip of a spear. Like they are just this front bit for this huge swath of population that thinks like that. And that is just so disheartening that I can't really handle it. And it becomes really hard because I just want to make jokes about them. Like they're so easy to make jokes about. Right. And that would be so fun to just make obnoxious jokes. But I just can't, because it's just too, it's just not funny to me. It's just, I can't find the humor. It's too depressing, which is ridiculous because I find humor in all sorts of depressing things. But for whatever reason, this one has been sticking with me.
Yeah, I don't know how. I wonder where the people are. If there are people that actually really like those kind of antics and.
There are.
I mean,
they're owning the libs, Pete. Come on.
I know, but sometimes they're just so dumb. Sometimes, like when she says,
they're super dumb.
When she said gazpacho, like it's a really embarrassing. It's got at some point. You start to think maybe people are like, oh, this person's really real idiot. But I don't know I don't know what my expectations are.
No, I think that type of stuff is really easy to brush off, right? Like it's just everybody messes up their words all the time. That's not a big deal.
Yeah. Sure.
The point is strong. I mean, for that matter, one could have pretty much the exact same conversation about Biden. Like he's known for making all sorts of gaffes. So but if you're really on Team Biden, you'll just say, oh, his brain's fine. But
his brain.
I mean, People believe various things on that one.
Yeah, well, he's an old guy. I thought he gave the speech. I thought he delivered the speech pretty well. I mean, he said Iranian
Oh, he
instead of
delivered
Ukrainian.
it great. Yeah, no,
But,
he delivered it great.
He doesn't. He just.
I mean, he said all the words that he was supposed to say in the right order and in a like impactful voice. You know, he did all the presidentialing that one is called upon to do in that moment.
Yeah, exactly.
I want a chance to do that.
All right. Thank you for your analysis on that and everything else and for talking to me. And I always love starting my week with you. And we appreciate you very much, Maura.
Thanks for letting me chat.
Yep. All right. There she goes, Maura Quint, everybody, at Behind Your Back. Please thank her for joining us. Always a great way to kick off the week. And I now want to bring on my next guest. Michael Cohen and I caught up yesterday. Was a national political columnist for the Boston Globe for years. He's now got his own Substack, which he's doing independently. It's great. I love it. Truth and Consequences, truthandcons.substack.com. He was a speechwriter at the US State Department. He's lectured at Columbia University. He's written several books, including American Maelstrom, the 1968 election and the politics of division. And he co-wrote Clear and Present Safety, which we talked about. He referenced on today's conversation, the world has never been better and why that matters to Americans. He's on Twitter at SpeechBoy71. Always love catching up with Michael. His phone wasn't perfect. A couple of words dropped, but I think it's still pretty good. But I should have done a better job getting a better audio feed from him. My bad, but a good conversation with Michael. I always love his perspective on things. We'll get a different perspective from Jared Yates Sexton than we do from Michael Cohen today. I've got that tomorrow for you. But here we go right now with the great Michael Cohen. You're pretty... Okay, I want to get you to react to this. You're pretty obsessed with Mike Lindell. Here, listen.
I've been working on it 5 months, and we're doing a class action. Actually, I'm announcing it here. I announced it on my program. You all watch frankspeech.com? Keep watching. But it's a class action lawsuit against all machines and that they're defective devices, okay? I have lawyers worked on this for 5 months. We're getting county commissioners,
All right, it's Mike Lindell over the weekend, probably the most important issue. And the only thing I really want to talk with Michael Cohen about is Mike Lindell and how he still has any money and credibility to do anything. Hi.
Pete, how you doing?
I just saw that right before I got you on the phone from your Twitter feed, so you have to answer for it.
Don't blame me, because actually, I kind of think that Mike Lindell, and I say this not to be harsh or mean, but I think he's psychologically, I think he's unwell, and I think that we probably should be paying less attention to him. I'm kind of sorry that I actually tweeted out something about his latest insanity, because he's not a well person.
Well, speaking of people who are not well, how do you look at Vladimir Putin? This is a guy that you've been covering him and writing about him. For goodness sake, you used to work at the State Department. You're very familiar with his works. How do you think he's doing psychologically?
I mean, I don't know the answer to that question, and I think it's actually a really good question, and one that would be great if we could get an answer to. Because I think, look, I can't get into the mind of Vladimir Putin, but I think it's pretty clear and pretty obvious that this entire escapade in Ukraine, and I don't mean to minimize it because it's a horrible tragedy, but this foray into Ukraine has been an unmitigated disaster, not just for Ukraine, but in some ways even more so for Russia. You know, this war is not going well. They clearly are losing. Even if they win, Russia wins, they still lose. Russia's become an international pariah. Their economy is, on the verge of collapse. And one has to wonder if something's not well with Putin, that he, undertook this operation and continues to double down on it. It's pretty terrifying, actually. And I'm not, and you know me, I'm like the opposite of a threat. I get concerned people start inflating threats and people start saying that things are like World War III. But this situation does alarm me because of how irrational and unstable Putin's behavior appears to be.
Well, you wrote a piece of the Daily Beast titled "Putin Losing Might Be Even Scarier Than Him Winning." Well, that's a headline that'll make me click, sir. Well done.
Thank you. I think the worse he's doing, I think the more inclination he has to actually double down to ensure that he wins or isn't humiliated. And that means, bad things for Ukraine and bad things for Russia. I was talking to an analyst over the weekend on my Zoom chat, on Friday, I should say, and he we sort of had this conversation about what happens if the Russians kill Vladimir Zelensky or kill the leadership of the Ukrainian government. And I think, you're looking at Russia being a pariah state if that were to happen for a long time to come. Certainly as long as Putin's in power, but maybe even beyond that. I mean, it would be a crossing a red line that I think would, be incredibly damaging over the long term for Russia, obviously damaging for Ukraine. I shouldn't even have to say that. But I think that's where this might be leading to, if they are able to successfully capture Kiev and successfully locate Zelensky.
You spoke over at Truth and Consequences. You spoke with this guy, Samuel Cherep, who you're just referring to. He's a political scientist at the Rand Corporation, an expert in all things Russia. We should all go over and was it something to listen to or read? Either way, what? I'm actually literally about to post the audio for our conversation, which was really fascinating. What else did you learn from this guy? I'm not familiar with him.
So Sam is one of the smart people. Person I always talk to on Russia. I see people I always reach out to, and he's one of the people I always talk to because he's pretty bright and he has a very, I think, even-handed sort of understanding and view of the situation. He's not the kind to sort of fly off the handle or to get a little bit hysterical as some people do. I'm talking about foreign affairs. And I think one takeaway from the conversation, and I mean, it was a hard conversation because I think both of us kind of came to the conclusion that, things are not going well, things are going to get worse, and there's no clear and obvious off-ramp to this war. In other words, it's very hard to see where the compromise is, right? Where all sides can reach some kind of agreement where there's a ceasefire or the war ends. Because, from the Ukrainian perspective, they want Russian troops out of Ukraine, right? I mean, I think that's obvious. They want their troops off Ukrainian soil. And second, the Russians, don't want that. The Russians want to decapitate the leadership in Kyiv, and they want to establish some kind of political control in the country. So I don't know how you square those two objectives, because really, if the Ukrainians win and get what they want, which is Russians off Ukrainian soil, that's a huge defeat for Putin. Even if he were to get, for example, Ukrainian pledge of neutrality or Ukrainian pledge not to join NATO, I still think this is a big loss for him. So it's hard to see where you find a compromise there. Now, at some point, Russia's ability to wage this war is going to falter. Right. That's something that I don't think we are talking about. I don't think we have a good sense of how long they can maintain this offensive before they simply run out of the resources to continue to prosecute this war. And that may be happening.
You mentioned off ramps and different solutions on the Sunday shows. You're hearing, and in the conversation in general, all about this no-fly zone. Tell me why. Is it a media thing? Because it's a pretty simple answer as to why we don't do that. That being said, it is what the president of Ukraine has said is calling for. So it needs to be discussed. I get it. But to seriously consider it seems to be I don't know. Everybody says as soon as you do that, you've got World War III for sure.
So I'm sympathetic to the idea that the media has to look at this issue, because the Ukrainians are talking about it a lot. You have some Western commentators, although not too many, who are bringing it up. But as you said, I mean, it's not going to happen. The no-fly zone over Ukraine is a declaration of war against Russia, period. That's what it means. To maintain a no-fly zone, if the U.S. and NATO were to do that, they would have to degrade Russia's air defense systems. Okay, that's an attack against a sovereign country. And then if you were to then, shoot down Russian planes over Ukraine, that is an act of war. And the U.S. is not going to do that. And for reasons that are the same reason, by the way, that quite obviously, the U.S. is not sending troops to Ukraine. We don't want to get into a war with Russia. We spent the entire Cold War avoiding getting into a shooting war with the Soviet Union for the obvious reason we don't want to start a nuclear war.
Right.
That is still the case today. And it is weird to me that I will say that people seem to have, when Joe Biden said, I'm not going to send troops to Ukraine, they seem to think he only meant the ground and not the air. But he meant both. And I think even underground. I mean, there's just no troops anywhere in Ukrainian soil below, on, or above. And I get why you have to ask the question. I get why the Ukrainians are demanding it, although I don't know that it's the best move for them to be doing. I don't think it's in their best interest to keep asking that they're not going to get. But, look, we should, I hate, when anybody asks the question, just say it's not going to happen.
Right.
But it's not going to happen, period.
Right.
And move on to the next issue.
What do you make of the way the Biden administration has handled this? It's so easy to criticize our security, our military, and certainly our intelligence services because they've gotten so much wrong, including most recently in Afghanistan. You could argue they got a lot of analysis there wrong. It would seem, however, that the intelligence agencies and the military, and especially the Biden administration, I think with the help of Congress for the most part, seem to have played this as well as it could be played by staying ahead of it, by predicting Putin's moves, publicizing them, talking about things like a false flag operation, basically forecasting what he was going to do. I don't know. I give them good grades on this, but you know a lot more about this stuff than I do. What do you think?
I think that in the future, they're going to write case studies on how well the Biden administration handled this situation. I mean that sincerely. I can't think of a single criticism that I could make. And this isn't somebody, look, I write, if you read my writings, you read my newsletter, Truth and Consequences, truthandcons.com, subscribe, you would see that I'm somewhat, left of center in my views, I guess you would say. But I have been very critical of Democratic presidents. I was very critical of Obama in Afghanistan. I've been critical of Biden on Iran. So I'm happy to criticize Democratic presidents. But on this one, I mean, I don't know how Biden could have handled it better than he has. First, the point you made, they leaked a lot of intelligence ahead of time. They got ahead of the game as far as who was responsible for the war. Nobody was going to conclude that Ukraine somehow initiated the war because they basically were 2 steps ahead of what Russia was planning to do. And by the way, don't forget that back in October and November, they were putting out intelligence that said Russia was going to invade Ukraine. And they were right. I mean, I'm so surprised by it. I didn't think it was going to happen, but they were right. But beyond that, I think the way they've handled it since then, they haven't demonized Putin. They have demonized Putin now. They didn't demonize him beforehand. In other words, before the conflict began, Biden tried to treat Putin with some level of respect to give him a chance to take an off-ramp to war, which, of course, he didn't do. And then now, since the war started, they have kept this coalition together, and they've done it in part by not insisting on taking all the glory.
Right.
One thing that's interesting is that they're letting the Europeans, to some extent, take the lead on a lot of this, which I think, empowers the Europeans. I think, first of all, it reflects how angry the Europeans are about this. And I think they really are. I think this is a sea change moment for Europe. Sure.
They have the more interest. I mean, everybody has interest in it.
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
They seem to know what they're doing. And maybe putting aside your own kind of hegemonic egos, as we have historically kind of had to control things, letting the people who know and have the most stake in it maybe take the lead. And I've heard there's been some pretty amazing negotiators working within the EU to get everybody on the same page. And I feel like that's pretty remarkable.
I think it is. And I think it's been a purposeful effort on the part of the Biden folks to let the Europeans take some of the lead, take some of the glory in this. I think that's very smart. It first of all, it gives them a win, which is good for them politically. But I think from a domestic standpoint, but I think also it empowers them. It makes them feel that they have it's not just the Americans dictating. And I think also if you want the Europeans to take on more of a security role in Europe, this is one way to do it.
Right.
To not make it as though the Americans are dominating the whole situation, but in fact, the Europeans are the ones taking the lead here. So to my mind, in big ways and in small ways, I think the Biden folks have handled this completely correctly. And I can't criticize it. And I think that, and look, it's not all about Trump, obviously, but I mean, our benchmark shouldn't be he's better than Trump, because literally everything is.
Right.
But can you imagine, Pete, if Donald Trump was president right now?
Well, he wouldn't have done this crisis? Putin wouldn't have done this if Trump was president. Everybody's been saying.
Right, of course, because he was so scared of Trump.
People are saying.
People are saying. I actually do wonder a little bit why Putin didn't do this when Trump was president, which it strikes me as a major miscalculation on his part. If you were going to attack Ukraine, it would have been while Trump was in the Oval Office. And it's hard. That's one I don't have a good answer to as to why that is. But that seems like a screw up to me, to be honest about it.
I mean, there's a lot of people have a lot of answers for that. The one that I think is probably most effective is that Trump was actively trying to basically deteriorate, disarm, and disintegrate NATO. I mean, why do anything when Trump was basically doing it for him? Also, creating so much division in the U.S. You know, it was like,
but he would not, right? But you would not have had an American president able to marshal the international response to this. That, in other words, NATO is stronger now because the U.S. has taken the. I mean, part of the U.S. NATO was stronger because Russia gave them incentive to be stronger, but also because Biden has organized them in a way that Trump never could. I think the Western alliance would be divided if this was happening and Trump was president. So I think that is a question that's worth expressing. The idea that he did this because he thought Biden was weak strikes me as a weak explanation for why this is happening now. But whatever the case is, look, the only way to look at this war is as a miscalculation on every possible level by the Russians. I mean, and I think part of it is that they believe their own rhetoric. They believe that the Ukrainians weren't a real country, which they claim all the time. They believe that the Ukrainians wouldn't resist them, that they'd be welcomed as liberators. The military plan is just atrocious. I mean, it's funny. All those pictures of the convoys. I wrote something about this days ago in my newsletter. The pictures of the convoys. I'm looking at those pictures and I'm thinking, if I had some planes and some drones and some troops that were, well equipped with anti-tank weapons, that's like the most delicious convoy I've ever seen, because it's like one straight line, like on a roadway. If you knock out the front and the back of it, I mean, you basically can solve it in its place, which appears to be what's happening. Crazy.
What's crazy to me, I think that military historians and military analysts must be just confused as to how this could be so bad. They are either running out of gas, shooting holes in their own gas tanks, or running out of food. Like, these guys aren't properly supplied with fuel and food. How could that happen? How?
I think they underestimated
the U.S. Yeah. When the U.S. went into Iraq and Afghanistan, countries separated by an ocean, there was very rarely was there a supply issue. Did they run out of fuel in the and that was across an ocean? They're literally Russia's next door. How are they not refueled?
There's two things here. I mean, first of all, you're exactly right. Logistics are the name of the game when you're invading a country, and supply chains are the name of the game. And the Russians
guys couldn't be in charge of a camping trip.
I mean, honestly, and I think that they just underestimated the Ukrainians. I think they thought they would go in, the Ukrainians would fold, they would quickly capture Kharkiv and Kiev, and they would, be in charge. But I do think, I suspect, I have no idea, but I suspect that part of the reason they took a slightly, weird to say this word, a softer touch, if you will, going in, was that they thought that they could, maybe that would help them pacify Ukraine after they defeated the Ukraine military, so make the occupation easier. But, look, to fight a war like this, in which we are now, 10 days into the war, and the Russians still do not control the airspace over Ukraine, that's insane. I mean, the Russian Air Force is so much stronger than the Ukrainian Air Force. Right. It should have been wiped out in the first 2 hours of the war, right? And instead, they sent these helicopters to capture an airfield in Kiev that ended up being a complete disaster. And everything they tried to do has been wrong. And again, I think they underestimated the Ukrainians. Look, they would not be the first army to underestimate their opponents. Lots have done it, but in a way that it's just, sort of hard to believe you could underestimate your opponents this badly. I think it's also the case that the Russians haven't fought a war like this, right? In Syria, It was mostly fought from the air. In Chechnya, they used sort of scorched earth tactics. And by the way, the first round of that war, they got their noses bloodied pretty badly. And then of course, when they took Crimea, it was basically done with subterfuge. There was barely a shot fired.
Right.
So I think they're not equipped for this. They're not used to it. And I think their political goals did not match their military objectives and military goals. And you're seeing the result now.
Yeah. Let me just ask you one more thing, which is about the world's reaction from Germany leading to oil companies, to Google and Apple, to airline industry, to the banking systems. It seems as though almost everybody that matters, the vote at the UN, 140 some countries against like 5, and it was like Eritrea, North Korea, and Magneto or something. So what surprised you about the unified isolation, of boycott, of sanction of Russia and the oligarchs and the industries, and to really the people. What has surprised you about this? I mean, I'm assuming you're surprised.
So I'm surprised. I'm surprised. I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised at the world reaction to this, because look, I wrote a book about it a couple of years ago about with my friend Mike Kosenko called "Clear and Present Safety," available to all your finer booksellers. And in the book, we basically argued like war has decreased, war has become less prevalent, particularly interstate war, between states. And a big part of the reason is that, to put it in simplistic terms, the juice is not worth the squeeze. In other words, that attacking another country and seizing their territory brings with it far worse consequences than it does benefits. So, you saw this with Crimea to some extent. Even though the Russians did annex Crimea and did begin this war in eastern Ukraine, they did have to deal with rather crippling sanctions for several years, and their economy would suffer a great deal. Now, they were able to overcome that because of their natural gas sales and because sanctions weren't tough enough. But still, there were consequences. So I expected there to be consequences from them doing this, economic consequences from government to government. I didn't expect it at the level it's been at, right? I mean, it's funny, we forget now because it was like 10 days ago, but people thought, well, it's not so clear that the world's going to, pull Russia off the SWIFT payment system, and they did within 72 hours of the war, and it was led in part by the Europeans. So that part, the intensity of it didn't surprise me. The fact that countries around the world were outraged by this, that did not surprise me. It's more the how quickly it happened. What has surprised me, and what I think is really interesting, is that it's not just government to government; it's also corporations and it's non-government organizations. Yeah. So it's like the soccer, the F1, the cat. There was something about a cat, international cat event.
Yeah, the FIFA, the gymnastics, the cat people.
The cat people, the dog people, everyone, basically, and then all these corporations that sell in Russia, like Shell pulled out of a multi-billion-dollar partnership with the Russian gas company. And look, and the biggest one is that what happened yesterday, which is Visa and MasterCard are no longer going to allow transactions in Russia. Right. They're not doing this because the government is telling them to do it. They're doing it because reputationally they have to. You're talking about countries taking billion-dollar hits because reputationally it is simply too toxic to be associated right now with Russia. I feel like so mind-boggling to me.
Yeah, no, it's fascinating to see that unification happen. I feel like it was trending. McDonald's was trending because they hadn't pulled out or something like that. But is that right? Apple was getting all kinds of criticism for not doing it. Then they did it. And look, I don't think Apple sells all that much in Russia, but nonetheless, it's symbolically what it says is that you have this. What it is you have this globalized. This is why, by the way, this situation and I look, just to defend my argument a few years ago, why wars have declined because of the reaction to this. Right, Russia can't go to war in Ukraine and not pay this incredibly severe economic price for doing so. And I'll give you the comparison here. In 1979, the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan. Right, killed the country's leader, took over the country. There was Western outrage. You may remember. I'm sure that the Jimmy Carter pulled the American athletes out of the Olympics in Moscow. But really, it was hard to make Russia pay a huge price because Russia was not integrated in the Soviet Union. Was not integrated in the global economy. So they had plenty of friends in Eastern Europe. They had plenty of communist allies around the world. And, they weren't dependent on Visa and MasterCard and selling their gas to Germany. Now they are. And so what 40 years ago, you couldn't make them pay a price. Now you can make them pay a price. And they're paying a major, major price. And the thing that I think is also really concerning, and one reason the sanctions worry me a little bit, even though I don't see much of a choice, but this is going to destroy the Russian economy. Right, you're going to have this huge brain drain from Russia. Russia's going to be a basket case for several years to come because of this war. And let me tell you something right now: if they bomb Kiev, if they kill Zelensky, if they commit more human rights violations, it's going to get even worse for them. And that, to me, is it's bad for the Russian people, but it also shows once again there is really no upside to going to war these days. Unless you're the United States, right? United States, you can get away with it, but every other country in the world. There's a hell of a lot of downside. Yeah. And you're seeing this with Russia. I mean, this is the 11th largest economy in the world, basically being crippled within a 10-day period. That's
amazing. That's extraordinary.
Last question is just about your analysis of how generally you've seen media handle this. I had one issue that I saw was some journalist, I forget who it was. I think it was Kelly O'Donnell, NBC, asking Jen Psaki, basically, is America just going to sit by and do nothing while the people of Ukraine are slaughtered? And she, of course, took issue with that. She's like, we're doing like all kinds, and she went on to list what they're doing. But that was the kind of question being posed that worries me about journalists almost rooting for a larger military conflict, almost rooting for the American, military to somehow get involved. I worry about that kind of thing. I do think there's been a lot of great work done by foreign correspondents in and around Ukraine and the region. And so, credit where it's due. Certainly, I think a lot of people are doing good work. But what are your thoughts on what you're seeing about the media and my criticism of that kind of a question?
Well, I will say this. I was watching very brief this morning. I watched CNN and I saw Jake Tapper having Secretary of State Blinken on. Mm-hmm. And he said, what are we doing to relieve the horrible suffering and the tragedy happening in Ukraine? And, he knows the answer to that question. We're doing a lot. But I think that the question meant to say, why are we doing more? Why are we getting involved militarily? And I get why those questions are being asked. I mean, I think it's frustrating, but I understand it. But it also is, I think to your point, I think it is just, it's not helpful, because how many times can the president and Blinken and other people explain why we're not fighting in Russia, right? They have nuclear weapons. That's why we're not fighting in Russia. It's a very simple equation. Yeah. If we go to war against Russia, we risk getting involved in nuclear war. We spent 75 years avoiding that scenario. Why do you think this is different?
Right.
We didn't go to Hungary. We didn't go to Czechoslovakia. We didn't go to Afghanistan. We didn't do any of those things. So seriously, get your head out of your ass. You know why you're doing it. You mean Afghanistan in the 70s, 80s, but we fought in the 70s, 80s, yeah. Right. Yeah. Fought a proxy war, exactly. But we don't get involved in wars with Russia. We don't get involved in wars with nuclear armed powers, because especially with nuclear armed powers that have thousands of missiles pointed at our homeland. We don't do that. And that's, by the way, what you want the president not to do. You want that. You don't want to get involved in wars like that. Right. So it's incredibly stupid. And I get why people are bringing it up, because, look, it's emotional, right? You can't see these pictures of people suffering and say, why are we doing more to help? The fact is, we're doing a lot to help. We're just not putting our boots on the ground to do it. But we are sending weapons to the Ukrainians. I'm sure we're sharing intelligence with them. We have put crippling sanctions on Russia. We have sought to isolate Putin. We tried diplomatically to give him every possible off-ramp to this war, and he didn't take. We have done everything that we can do except put our troops on the ground, and put our blood and treasure at risk. And not really treasure, because we actually could hurt ourselves economically. Because if we cut off, energy sales from Russia, that's we're going to also see higher gas prices.
Yeah.
But I mean, look, there is this mindset, and it makes me crazy. The only way you can help is by firing a gun. No, it doesn't work like that. We can do things to help Ukraine. We are doing things to help Ukraine. We don't have to get involved in war to do that.
That being said, they have called, Zelensky created something called the International Legion, and many American veterans and others are joining the fight. They're literally going to fight, which is weird, but I don't know.
If they want to fight, let them fight. I'm not going to stand in their way. Let them fight. But, it's not, we're not going to, look, the Russians already think we're waging war on them. And arguably, by putting these crippling sanctions on them, we're waging economic war on them. Okay? I saw something the other day where I was like, who was it? I think it was Richard Engels. So, why? It was a piece about not sharing direct intelligence, like intelligence about where Russian troops are for the Ukrainians to kill them. And I'm like, we're not sharing it. That's an act of war. If we literally say to the Ukrainians, the Russians are right here, fire your gun at them, we become participants in the war. And you talk about an irrational dictator fighting an incredibly stupid conflict. You want to get involved in a fight with that guy? No. I mean, I'm sorry. I get why they're asking the questions, but they really do need to step back and say, is this the most useful thing to be asking policymakers right now? Because I don't think it is, actually.
I already said it's the last one, but in your most recent post at Truth and Consequences, go to truthandcons.substack.com to subscribe. It's titled This Week in Non-Ukraine News, and you do cover the latest in COVID, which I think is interesting. So I just wanted to ask you about that one part of non-Ukraine news. You also you answer, will Donald Trump go to jail? But you'll have to go subscribe to read that one. But the COVID update part, see what I did there? The COVID update part, Michael. Give me your take on where we're at.
I was going to mention, by the way, that right now having an anniversary sale, 20% off year subscriptions. That's $40 a year, $4 a month. Best deal in journalism, I promise you.
There you go, everybody. Go subscribe right now, and thank you to Michael for joining me whenever he does over the years. It's a way to pay him back, for God's sake. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you. So on the COVID thing, I was just struck by the numbers, which are, really have declined as far as number of cases. So around 50,000 cases, 7-day average. People are still dying in large numbers, still about 1,800 people a day, which is way too high. But in New York, we're talking about there's like 700 cases a day in the entire state. We've seen really this Omicron wave has declined. And it's funny, they just announced that my kids don't have to wear masks in school anymore starting on Monday.
Right.
And it does feel like we have reached almost 2 years into this pandemic. I don't want to say the end of it, because then we're going to have like the Zeta variant that's going to make your penis fall off or something. I don't know, But it does seem like we've reached a before and after moment in the pandemic. But the one thing I did mention in that post was Ron Desantis, governor of Florida, berating high school students over wearing masks. Yeah. Look, you know what? I don't understand. Look, people want to wear masks and they're inside. That's fine. I get it. I completely respect their. I don't feel the need to do so. I was just in Tennessee, which is like, I think you get arrested if you wear a mask in Tennessee. Honestly, it's like, and the COVID down there is, it's the best.
Is that right?
It's really
good stuff.
Top notch COVID. Yeah. No. And like people but some people still did wear masks. I'm like, that's fine. But to berate people, high school students wearing, what kind of an asshole does that? Honestly.
Yeah. Well, he didn't want people standing behind him at that press conference with masks. I'll defend him.
Well, what's the defense?
Well, he didn't want when politicians do photo ops and they stand behind podiums and they put people behind him. In this case, he was at a college, so they put college students behind him. And in that case, they're sending the exact opposite message of what he wants. He's going to tell them it's bad optics for me.
Okay, but can you imagine if a Democratic governor went up to a bunch of kids and berated them because they weren't vaccinated? No, Ron says, it's their choice, right? The choice people here say, we should be able to decide whether we're going to get vaccinated, whether we're going to put our neighbors at risk. Okay, fine. It's your choice. It's also a choice to wear a fucking mask in public. And if you want to wear one, let them wear one.
I thought it was too much when Ron DeSantis, while a kid was getting his booster, DeSantis knocked the syringe out of the nurse's hand. I thought that should have gotten more coverage.
It should have. You're right. That seemed actually worse. But, there was video of that. I think that's the problem.
There's no video. We just
no video.
About it.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, go read more about that and everything else at truthandcons.substack.com, and follow Michael, of course, on Twitter, where he's always awesome, at SpeechBoy71. Thank you for joining me today, my friend. Always appreciate it.
Pete, always a pleasure to talk to you.
And there he goes, Michael Cohen, everybody. Go check him out. Follow him on Twitter. Thank him for joining me here at SpeechBoy71. And you can go support him with his Substack. You can sign up and be a paying subscriber. I sure am. It's truthandcons.substack.com. Truthandcons.substack.com at SpeechBoy71. Michael Cohen. Maura, Quint, thank you very much. The jingles from Pete Coe with the news and the opening. You're the greatest, buddy. John Carroll singing us out right now. So many other amazing contributors to the show. If you want to be one, just email me and join our community. StandUpWithPete.com. Thank you to Indeed.com. Go to Indeed.com/standup right now just to give me the traffic. Indeed.com/standup. Just go punch that in so I get credit for that. And hey, if you need to hire someone, use them too. You get a $75 credit. That's it. That's all. John Carroll singing us out. I'll talk to you tomorrow.
Well, there's a whole lot more of us who know us right. They'll keep right on ignoring us if we keep sitting tight. You got to open up the window to let in some light. You got to stand up. That's right. You got to rise up. You got to stand up. You got to stare the devil straight in the eye. We got to let him know it's his turn to go. See it clear and all you hear is a lie. Up off of your butt, get down off of your fence. And even if it ain't a very friendly audience, well, they'll begin to listen when you start making sense. And you stand up, stand up. No need to point your rifle to defend your town. Just stand up, stand up. You know they can't deny you what you But all they had to go on was the time they were in, with other causes for laws, and since they weren't even sin, they knew that change was gonna come before the change could begin. They had to stand up. All right, they had to stand up. We got to stand up. We got to look the devil square in the eye. We gotta let him know it's his time to go, and make it clear when all we hear is a lie. Why you lying awake wondering where the money all went? It'll be the cost of freedom that'll go unspent. You can see him flee the scene of that experiment if you stand up. All right, we got to speak up, we got to reach up and raise your voice in every way you know how. Don't be toes up, you got to show up. Ain't no better time to do it but now. No need to pledge allegiance to no wanton tribe. Rise up, show obedience to the voice inside, and listen well and it'll tell you not to run and hide. It says stand up.